Wade Drifter counted the $3 silver worn smooth from handling, his entire fortune after 6 months of wandering. The abandoned homestead's torn shelter barely kept out the autumn wind, and mice had found his flour sack in the night, leaving him with nothing but memories of meals. Then she appeared through the evening dust, a woman in faded calico, pushing two hollow-eyed children forward with trembling hands, when she didn't respond to his greeting. Wade understood. She was deaf, her fingers dancing desperately in the air, forming signs he couldn't read except for their meaning. "Take them, please." The boy, maybe 8, stood protective beside his smaller sister. Both wore shoes worn through to nothing, faces gaunt with hunger that Wade recognized from his own mirror. The woman's hands moved again, more urgently, pushing her children toward him, while her eyes begged what her voice couldn't speak. "Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." Wade stared at the 3 figures before him, his mind calculating the mathematics of survival. $3 silver, no flour. Winter approaching like a promise of death. And now this, a deaf woman trying to give away her children because she couldn't feed them. The boy stepped forward, his thin shoulders squared with a dignity that belonged on someone triple his age. "Our pa died 3 weeks back," he said, voice crackling like dry leaves. "Fever took him. Ma can't hear or speak, but she knows things. She knows we're starving." Wade's chest tightened. He recognized himself in the boy's protective stance, remembered being 8 years old and alone, scavenging for scraps behind saloons while respectable folk looked away. The girl, she couldn't be more than 5, swayed on her feet, one small hand clutching her brother's sleeve. "What's your name, son?" "Samuel. This is Emma." The boy's chin lifted. "We're not beggars. Ma just wants them to live." The woman, their mother, moved her hands again, and this time Wade saw the desperation breaking through her composure. Her fingers pointed at her children, then at him, then pressed against her heart before gesturing away. Even without knowing sign language, he understood. "Take them. I'll go." "No." The word came out rougher than Wade intended. He cleared his throat, then pulled his last possession of value from his pocket, a small bag of cornmeal he'd been saving. "Nobody's going anywhere tonight. You'll stay here." Samuel translated Wade's words into signs for his mother. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head violently, pointing at his meager supplies, at the torn shelter that barely deserved the name. Wade grabbed a piece of charcoal from the dead fire and found a smooth board. In large letters, he wrote, "Eat first, talk after." The woman read it, and fresh tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her face. She tried once more to push her children forward, but Emma had already collapsed against Wade's side, her tiny body trembling with exhaustion. "Please, mister," Samuel whispered. "She hasn't eaten in 3 days. Give her ma's portion too." Wade looked at the boy, at the unconscious way he'd positioned himself between his mother and sister, ready to protect both despite having nothing to protect them with. "What's your mother's name?" "Martha." Wade divided the cornmeal into 4 portions, adding water from his canteen to make a thin mush. "Then Martha eats too, or nobody does." The blue spatterware bowls were cracked, but clean, and Wade divided the cornmeal mush with the precision of someone who'd learned to make nothing stretch into something. Emma had fallen asleep against him, but stirred when Samuel gently shook her shoulder. "Emma." "Food." The little girl's eyes fluttered open, focusing on the bowl with an intensity that made Wade's stomach clench. She took the horn spoon with both hands, as if afraid it might disappear, and began eating with small, careful bites that showed she'd learned to make meals last. Martha refused her portion, pushing it toward her children. Wade grabbed his charcoal again, wrote firmly on the board, "Eat or I feed them nothing." She read it, her weathered hands trembling as they signed something to Samuel. "Ma says you're wasting food on her," the boy translated. "Tell her I've been hungry before. Tell her children need strong mothers, not martyrs." Samuel's fingers moved carefully, forming the signs he'd learned from birth. Martha's eyes met Wade's then, and he saw something shift in them, surprise, perhaps, that a drifter would understand such things. She took the spoon. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of horn against clay and the distant howl of coyotes. Emma finished first, her bowl licked clean, and crawled into her mother's lap. The child's eyes kept finding Wade's face, studying him with the direct curiosity of the young. "You got young ones, mister?" Samuel asked, his own bowl empty now. "No. You act like someone who does." Wade almost smiled at that. "I was young once. Remember what empty felt like?" Martha set down her bowl, only half finished, and began signing rapidly to Samuel. The boy's face grew serious as he watched her hands. "Ma wants to know why you're helping us. She says most folk would have sent us on." Wade considered the question while adding small sticks to the dying fire. Why was he helping them? He could claim it was Christian charity, but he hadn't seen the inside of a church in 2 years. Could say it was simple human decency, but he'd watched plenty of decent humans turn away from need. The truth was simpler and more complex. When Martha had stood there, trying to give away her children to save them, he'd seen his own mother. 20 years ago, she'd faced the same choice. She'd chosen differently. Keeping him until consumption took her, leaving him alone at 7. He'd survived, but barely. Became hard as leather and twice as tough, trusting no one, needing nothing except the next meal and a place to sleep. But tonight, watching Emma trust him enough to fall asleep against his side, something long frozen began to thaw. He wrote on the board, "Winter comes, shelter here, safer together." Martha read it. Tears starting fresh. Her hands moved, and Samuel translated, "She says we have nothing to give in return. Don't want anything." "Everyone wants something," Samuel said, and Wade heard the boy's own suspicion, not his mother's. Wade looked at the boy too young to be so careful, too young to weigh every kindness for its hidden cost. "Sometimes, son, people just need to not be alone." Martha signed something, and Samuel's voice softened. "Ma says loneliness is a kind of hunger, too." Wade nodded, surprised by the poetry of it. The truth. He'd been feeding himself, but starving anyway. Wandering from town to town, never stopping long enough to matter to anyone. These three had each other, but were starving in the body. Maybe together they could make something whole. "There's a storage cellar under the shelter," Wade said, addressing Samuel but watching Martha read his lips. "Probably some preserved goods left from whoever abandoned this place. Tomorrow we'll check. Tonight, everyone sleeps warm." He pulled his one wool blanket from his bedroll, handed it to Martha. She tried to refuse, but he was already walking outside to check the shelter's perimeter, giving them privacy to settle. The October air bit sharp, and he could smell snow coming maybe a week out. They'd need supplies, better shelter, warmer clothes. His $3 wouldn't go far, but the Millfield Ranch was 8 miles east. They always needed fence work before winter. When he came back inside, he found them arranged carefully, Martha against one wall with Emma curled in her arms. Samuel positioned protectively beside them, the blanket covering all three. They'd left a space for him by the fire, his own bedroll untouched. "That's yours, mister," Samuel said, pointing to the empty spot. Wade looked at the boy's earnest face, at Martha's questioning eyes, at Emma's peaceful sleep. "Name's Wade, and we share everything now. Equal. That's the rule if you're staying." Martha's fingers moved slowly, deliberately. Samuel watched, then translated. "Ma says sharing equal means she needs to know what work needs doing." Wade smiled then, the first real smile in months. "Can you sew?" Martha held up her hands, showed him calluses from years of needlework. "Then tomorrow, you mend what needs mending. Samuel and I will check snares and gather wood. Emma," he paused, looking at the sleeping child. "Emma guards the shelter from mice," Samuel translated, and for the first time since she'd appeared in his doorway, Wade saw Martha smile. It transformed her face. revealing the woman she'd been before grief and hunger carved their marks. Her hands moved once more. "Ma says it's a deal," Samuel reported, then added on his own, "Mr. Wade, thank you." Wade settled onto his bedroll, staring up at the gaps in the roof where stars showed through. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, he knew that. 3 more mouths to feed, winter approaching, barely enough shelter for one, let alone 4. The sensible thing would be to send them on to town, let the church women figure it out. But sensible had kept him alone for 6 years. Sensible had him counting 3 silver dollars like they meant something. Sensible was just another word for scared. Emma murmured in her sleep, something about biscuits, and Martha's hand automatically smoothed her daughter's hair. The gesture was so natural, so full of unconscious love, that Wade had to look away. He'd forgotten such tenderness existed, forgotten that people could be gentle with each other without wanting something in return. Tomorrow, he'd walk to Millfield, trade labor for supplies. Tomorrow, he'd start teaching Samuel how to set proper snares, how to read weather signs, how to survive. Tomorrow, Martha would make this rough shelter a little more like home, the way women somehow knew how to do. Tomorrow, Emma would wake up safe and fed. And maybe that was worth more than all the silver dollars in California. The fire settled with a soft crash of embers. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet, and the wind had stilled. Wade closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't dream of moving on. The 8-mile walk to Millfield Ranch gave Wade time to think, though thinking might have been a mistake. Each step took him farther from the shelter where he'd left Martha and the children, and doubt crept in like morning frost. What was he doing? Taking responsibility for 3 souls when he could barely keep himself alive. But then he'd remember Emma's tiny hand reaching for his as he'd left that morning, and Samuel's determined promise to guard the homestead, and Martha's signs that Samuel translated as, "Be careful." When was the last time anyone had cared if he was careful Tom Millfield was a fair man, which was rare enough to be notable? He stood on his porch, coffee cup steaming in the cold morning air, and listened to Wade's proposition without interrupting. "Fence work for supplies," Tom repeated, stroking his gray beard. "Winter's coming on fast. I've got near 3 miles of fence that needs mending before the snow flies. I can do it in 4 days. Tom's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious for one man." "I've got reason to be ambitious." Something in Wade's tone made Tom study him closer. "You're that drifter staying at the old Hensley place." "I am. Heard you took in a widow and her young ones." Wade met his gaze steadily. "I did." Tom sipped his coffee, considering. "Most folks are talking, saying it ain't proper. A single man and a widow. Most folks have full bellies and warm houses. Makes it easy to judge." A smile tugged at Tom's mouth. "Fair point. Tell you what, you fix that fence in 4 days. I'll give you flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, and throw in that old milk goat my wife's been wanting gone. She's a contrary creature, but she gives good milk." "Deal." Wade started to turn away, then stopped. "Mr. Millfield, you got any spare lumber? Nothing fancy. Just enough to patch a roof." Tom studied him for a long moment. "There's a pile of odds and ends behind the barn. You finish that fence work, you can take what you can carry." Wade worked like a man possessed, which perhaps he was. Possessed by the image of Samuel trying to be brave, of Emma's trust, of Martha's dignity despite her desperation. His hands bled by noon, but he didn't slow. Tom sent his ranch hand with water and a noon meal of biscuit and bacon, and Wade ate standing, still working. By evening of the first day, he'd finished a 1/4 mile. He walked back in darkness, guided by stars and instinct, carrying a sack of provisions Tom's wife had insisted on sending, just a Christian kindness, she'd said, though her eyes had been curious about the woman who'd driven a drifter to work himself bloody. The shelter glowed with warm light as he approached, and Wade stopped, struck by the sight. Through the gaps in the walls, he could see movement, shadows that meant life and activity. When had he last come home to light and warmth? Samuel burst out before Wade could reach the door. Mr. Wade, Ma fixed the roof and Emma caught a mouse. Well, she screamed and I caught it, but she helped. Inside, Wade barely recognized the place. Martha had somehow transformed the rough shelter into something approaching a home. The dirt floor had been swept clean and packed firm. Their few possessions were organized on shelves she'd fashioned from scrap wood. The holes in the walls were chinked with mud and grass. A cheerful fire crackled in a hearth she'd cleared of years of debris. Emma ran to him, holding up a piece of fabric. Look, Mama's making me a new dress from Mr. Wade's old shirt.
Do what Jesus said.
Wade looked at Martha, who signed something rapid and apologetic. Samuel translated. She says she hopes you don't mind. The shirt was too torn to mend properly, but the fabric's still good. Don't mind at all, Wade said, setting down the provisions. Brought supper. Martha's eyes widened at the supplies. Her hands flew, and Samuel said, Ma wants to know what this cost you. Work for fair pay. Wade pulled out the bacon and beans. And there's more coming, including a goat. Emma's squeal could probably be heard at Millfield Ranch. A goat. Really, truly. Really, truly. But she's ornery, I'm told. I'll love her anyway, Emma declared with the confidence of a child who'd never met an animal she couldn't befriend. They prepared supper together, falling into a rhythm as if they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Martha directed with gestures. Samuel fetched and carried. Emma chattered nonstop about the goat she hadn't even met yet, and Wade found himself smiling more than he had in months. After they'd eaten, Samuel taught Wade more signs: water, fire, home. The last one caught Wade off guard. The sign was two hands coming together, forming a roof. Home, Wade repeated, making the sign clumsily. Martha corrected his hands gently, adjusting his fingers. Her touch was work-roughened but careful. When he got it right, she smiled and signed something else. Ma says home isn't just a roof, Samuel translated. It's the people under it. Wade looked around the small shelter at Samuel practicing knots with a piece of rope, at Emma already half asleep against her mother's side, at Martha's knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to his lonely soul. Your ma's a wise woman, Wade said. Martha signed again, and Samuel grinned as he translated. She says wisdom comes from suffering, and she'd rather be foolish and full. Tomorrow I go back to finish the fence, Wade said. 3 more days. Then we'll have enough supplies to last a few weeks. After that... He paused, not sure how to voice his plans. Martha signed a single word, and Samuel translated. After, Wade took the charcoal and board, wrote carefully, after we make this place ready for winter, together. Martha read it, her eyes filling. She signed something long and complex, her face earnest. Samuel watched, then said quietly, Ma says she's never had anyone choose to stay before. People always leave or get left. She says, thank you for choosing us. Wade's throat tightened. Tell her I'm the one who should be thankful. Been drifting so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a reason to come home. That night, as they settled into sleep, still in their separate corners but somehow feeling closer, Wade listened to the quiet breathing of people who trusted him. Outside, wind rattled the patched roof, but inside felt safe and warm, not because of the fire or the repairs, but because of what Martha had said. The people under the roof made it a home. Tomorrow would bring more work, blistered hands, aching muscles. But tonight, Wade Drifter had something he'd never owned in all his wandering years, people waiting for him to come home. The thought followed him into sleep, where he dreamed not of moving on, but of building up, building something worth staying for. The goat arrived on a Tuesday morning, and with her came trouble Wade hadn't anticipated. He'd finished Tom Millfield's fence in the promised 4 days, his hands raw and back screaming, but proud of the work. Tom had been true to his word: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, and the ornery goat Wade led on a frayed rope while carrying salvaged lumber on his shoulder. The October sun was weak, but welcome as he approached the shelter. Emma's shriek of joy could have scared off wolves. "She's beautiful." The goat, a scraggly brown and white creature with devil's eyes, immediately tried to eat Emma's dress. "What'll you name her?" Wade asked, dropping the lumber gratefully. "Biscuit, because she's brown and white like the biscuits Mama makes." Martha appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her hands, and Wade's chest did something peculiar at the sight. She'd been baking with the supplies he'd earned. The shelter smelled like home. "We're heading to town for winter supplies," Wade announced, watching Samuel translate. "All of us." Martha's signs were quick, worried. Samuel said, "Ma thinks we should stay here. People talk." "Let them talk. We need things I can't trade for at ranches. Warm clothes for the children, wool blankets, maybe some glass for the windows." The walk to town took 2 hours with Emma riding on Wade's shoulders and Samuel leading Biscuit, who tried to eat everything they passed. Martha walked beside Wade, her presence steady and calming despite the worry in her eyes. The town of Cedar Ridge wasn't much, one main street with a general store, church, saloon, and handful of other buildings, but it might as well have been Denver for how the townspeople stared. Wade felt Martha tense beside him, saw Samuel's jaw set stubbornly. The general store smelled of pickle brine and leather. Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, stood behind the counter, her mouth pursing as they entered. "Mr. Drifter," she said, the Mr. sounding like it cost her. "Heard you'd taken up residence at the old Hensley place." "We have," Wade emphasized the we, meeting her stare directly. "Need supplies for winter." Emma had wandered to the candy jars, her eyes wide with longing. Samuel stood protectively near his mother, who was examining fabric with careful fingers. "That widow woman," Mrs. Henderson said, voice pitched to Carrie. "Shameful. Carrying on with a man not her husband. And those poor children." "Those children are fed and safe," Wade interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet danger that made smart people step back. "Their mother is a respectable woman doing her best in hard circumstances." "Still," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, "it ain't proper." That's when Samuel exploded. "He's our pa now." The boy's voice cracked with emotion, his thin body trembling with righteous anger. "Mr. Wade works himself bloody for us. He shares everything equal, even when he don't have enough. He's teaching me to hunt and trap and read weather signs. He's more pa than—" Samuel's voice broke completely, and Wade saw the tears the boy was fighting. The store went silent. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. 2 other women who'd been examining bolts of cloth stared openly. Wade put his hand on Samuel's shoulder, felt the boy shaking. "It's all right, son." "No, it ain't." Samuel swiped at his eyes angrily. "They don't know nothing. They don't know Ma sits up all night when Emma's sick, signing prayers even though God might not hear hands instead of voices. They don't know you gave us your only blanket, that you sleep cold so we can sleep warm. They don't know." "Samuel." Martha had moved silently to her son, her hands gentle on his face. She signed something, and the fight went out of the boy. "Ma says anger makes us small," he translated, voice hollow. "She says kindness is the only thing that makes us bigger than our troubles." Wade looked at Mrs. Henderson, who had the grace to appear ashamed. "We need 2 wool blankets, winter coats for the children if you have them, wool fabric for a dress, window glass, nails, and a pound of penny candy. We don't extend credit to—" Mrs. Henderson faltered under Wade's stare. Wade pulled out money, not his precious 3 silver dollars, but bills Tom Millfield had added to his pay. Recognizing a man's dignity mattered as much as flour. "I'm paying cash." As Mrs. Henderson gathered their supplies, her movements sharp with embarrassment, Emma tugged on Wade's coat. "Can I really have candy?" "A whole pound, little one. You'll share with Samuel. Always. She beamed, then looked worried. Are people mad at us? Wade knelt to her level. Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand. Your mama being deaf. Me not being your blood father, it confuses them. But you are our pa. Samuel said so. The simple certainty in her voice made Wade's eyes burn. If you'll have me. Emma threw her arms around his neck. We already decided. Last night when you were sleeping. Me and Samuel and Mama talked about it. You're ours now. You can't leave even if you want to. Wade held her tight, looking over her small shoulder at Martha, who was watching with eyes that held too much understanding. She signed something, and Samuel, still sniffling, translated, Ma says belonging to people is the only wealth that matters. They left the store with their purchases, and more misses. Henderson had added extra fabric, mumbling something about Christian charity. The walk home was quieter, each processing what had happened. That evening, as they sat around the fire with Emma and Samuel sharing penny candy, Wade watched Martha sew by lamplight, her fingers swift and sure. She was making Samuel a winter shirt from the new fabric, each stitch an act of love. Thank you, Wade said suddenly, for letting Samuel defend us. Another woman might have been embarrassed. Martha set down her sewing, signed slowly so Wade could follow family, defend, always. Samuel was already teaching Emma to sign her letters, the two of them practicing in the firelight. Wade watched them. These children who'd claimed him in a general store, who'd decided he was theirs without asking his permission. Mr. Wade, Samuel said quietly, I'm sorry I got angry. Don't be. You stood up for your family. That's what a man does. Samuel straightened at being called a man. Pa, my first pa, he was good, but he was quiet. Never said much. Never fought for much. You're different. Different how? Samuel struggled for words. You fight for us without using fists. You make people see us different, like we matter. You do matter. All of you. Martha signed something long and complex. Samuel watched, then blushed. Ma says she was wrong. She thought she was saving us by trying to give us away. But you saved us by keeping us together. That night, Emma fell asleep in Wade's lap instead of her mother's, clutching a peppermint stick in one sticky hand. Samuel dozed against his mother's shoulder, exhausted from the day's emotions. Martha and Wade sat in comfortable silence, the language barrier somehow less important than the understanding between them. Wade picked up the charcoal and board, wrote, Samuel called me Pa today. Martha read it, smiled, and wrote back, he chose true. Wade stared at her words, then added, never had family before. Martha's response was simple, now you do. As if to emphasize the point, Emma mumbled in her sleep, Papa, Biscuit needs a blanket too. Wade chuckled softly, and Martha's silent laughter joined his. Outside, Biscuit bleated indignantly, probably trying to eat the shelter walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, winter was coming fast, and they needed to patch more walls, store more wood, secure more supplies. But tonight, Wade Drifter wasn't drifting anymore. He was Papa to a boy who'd defend him to the world, father to a girl who'd claimed him with sticky peppermint fingers, and something not yet defined but increasingly important to a woman who made even silence feel like conversation. The fire burned low, and Wade banked it carefully for the night. As he settled into his bedroll, he realized Mrs. Henderson had been wrong. This wasn't improper or shameful. This was family. Unexpected, unconventional, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Samuel had been right to defend it. Wade would spend the rest of his life earning the title the boy had given him in that store. The word followed him into sleep, where he dreamed of teaching Samuel to shoot straight and true, of Emma's laughter, of Martha's hands speaking poetry in the air, and of a home that was more than walls and a roof. It was the people who chose each other, again and again, every day. The blizzard arrived without warning on an October night when winter should have still been weeks away. Wade woke to the sound of wind screaming like a wounded animal and the walls of their shelter groaning under the assault. Ice crystals blew through every gap in the boards, and the temperature had dropped so fast that frost was forming on the inside walls. "Samuel," Wade barked, already moving. "Get your mother and Emma to the corner with the fewest gaps. Now." The boy didn't question, just moved. Martha was already awake, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from understanding exactly how dangerous their situation was. Emma whimpered, still half asleep. As Samuel bundled her in their blankets, Wade grabbed his tools and the salvaged lumber he'd been saving for gradual improvements. No time for gradual now. The north wall was bowing inward with each gust, and if it went, they'd be fully exposed to a storm that could kill them in minutes. "The roof's lifting," Samuel shouted over the wind. Wade saw it too. The patched section Martha had repaired was peeling back like paper. He grabbed the canvas wagon cover they'd been saving and threw it to Samuel. "Tie that down over your mother and sister. Make a tent in the corner." His fingers were already numb as he started nailing boards across the failing wall. The hammer slipped in his frozen hands, catching his thumb. Blood welled and froze instantly, but he kept working. Each board he added bought them minutes. Martha appeared beside him suddenly, holding more boards, her hair whipped around her face, ice already forming in it, but her eyes were determined. She pointed at the wall, then at herself, making it clear she would hold the boards while he nailed. "You should stay with Emma." She shook her head fiercely, already pressing a board against the wall. The wind tried to rip it from her hands, but she held on, her slight frame somehow finding strength. They worked together in desperate harmony. Wade hammered while Martha held. Then she'd have the next board ready before he'd finished with the last. Samuel appeared with their rope, and Wade realized the boy was thinking ahead. They could lash the boards if they ran out of nails. "Smart boy," Wade shouted, and saw Samuel's face brighten despite the terror. The storm intensified, and Wade made a calculation that chilled him more than the wind. Their shelter wouldn't hold, not against this. He could probably survive if he huddled in the most protected corner, conserving heat, waiting it out, alone. He'd done it before, survived by making himself small, needing nothing, being nothing but endurance. But he wasn't alone now. Emma was crying, her small voice barely audible over the storm. Samuel was trying to be brave, but Wade could see him shaking. Martha's hands were bleeding from splinters, her face set in grim determination. They wouldn't survive. Not all of them. Not without something more. Wade made his choice. He positioned himself against the weakest section of wall, using his body as a human brace. The wind hit him like repeated blows from a prizefighter, and the cold was beyond description. It burned like fire, then went numb, then burned again. "Mr. Wade, no." Samuel tried to pull him back. "You'll freeze." Wade grabbed the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me. You're the man if something happens. You take care of them. Promise me." "Nothing's gonna happen. Promise me." Samuel's eyes filled with tears that froze on his cheeks. "I promise, but you gotta stay. We need you. I need you." Wade pulled the boy close for just a moment, then pushed him back toward the corner. "Help your mother. Keep Emma warm." He returned to his position against the wall, spreading his arms wide to cover as much area as possible. His coat was good wool, but not good enough for this. He could feel his body heat being sucked away, stolen by the greedy wind. Martha appeared in front of him, her face stricken. She signed frantically, and though his vision was blurring, Wade understood the gist. She was telling him to stop, to save himself. "Can't," he said through chattering teeth. "Wall won't hold without—" She did something that stunned him into momentary warmth. She kissed him, quick, fierce, her chapped lips against his frozen ones. Then she was gone, returning with his blanket, their blankets, every piece of fabric they owned. She and Samuel worked together, wrapping them around Wade as he stood against the wall, creating layers between him and the killing cold. "We do this together," Samuel said fiercely, wedging himself beside Wade, adding his small weight to hold the wall. "Family stays together." Martha took position on Wade's other side, and even Emma appeared, pressing her tiny body against his legs. adding her insignificant but invaluable weight to their human wall. They stood through the night like that, four people making themselves into a barrier against the storm. Wade's world narrowed to the warmth of Samuel pressed against his right side, Martha against his left, Emma's small hands clutching his legs. The storm raged and tried to tear them apart, but they held. Somewhere in the darkest part of night, when Wade couldn't feel his feet and his thoughts were becoming dangerously slow, he felt Martha's hand find his. Her fingers were ice, but she squeezed, and he squeezed back. A conversation without words. I'm here. We're here. We won't let go. Samuel started talking, his voice hoarse but determined. Remember when Emma named the goat, and Biscuit tried to eat Ma's only good dress, and you said family shares everything equal, even ornery goats, even storms, Wade managed through frozen lips. Even storms, Samuel agreed. Emma's voice piped up from below. Papa's warm.
Iyan sintado.
He wasn't, he was freezing to death, but somehow her belief made him warmer. These three people had chosen him, were literally standing with him against death itself. If they could stand, he could stand. Dawn came like a miracle. The wind died as suddenly as it had risen, and weak sunlight revealed a world transformed by ice and snow. Wade's legs gave out the moment it was safe, and he collapsed, pulling all of them down into a heap. They lay there in the sudden silence, tangled together, breathing, alive. Martha's hands moved weakly, and Samuel translated with a voice raw from cold. Ma says you tried to die for us. No, Wade corrected, his voice barely a whisper. Tried to live for you. Different thing. They helped each other up, surveying the damage. The shelter had held, barely. The wall Wade had braced was cracked but standing. The roof needed work but was mostly intact. They'd lost some supplies to the wind, and Biscuit was bleeding indignantly from where she'd sheltered behind the woodpile. But they were alive. Wade tried to take a step and nearly fell. His feet were numb. Dangerous sign of frostbite. Martha caught him, surprisingly strong for her size, and helped him to the rebuilt fire that Samuel was already coaxing to life. As Martha worked on his frozen feet, warming them slowly, painfully, Wade watched his family. When had he started thinking of them as that move around the shelter? Samuel hauled in wood. Emma fed Biscuit the last of their corn. Martha's gentle hands brought feeling back to his extremities. We could have died, Samuel said quietly, standing beside him. Could have. Wade agreed. But we didn't. Know why? Samuel shook his head. Because we were together. Wall would have failed if I'd stood alone, would have frozen if you hadn't wrapped me, would have given up if Emma hadn't said I was warm. If your ma hadn't held my hand. Samuel considered this. My first pa, died of fever. Ma couldn't help him, no matter how she tried. She blamed herself, said she should have done more. Sometimes people leave us no matter what we do, Wade said carefully. But last night, we all chose to stay. That's what made the difference. Martha looked up from tending his feet, and her eyes held something Wade hadn't seen before, not just gratitude or affection, but possibility. She signed something complex, and Samuel blushed deep red. What'd she say? She said a man who'd use his body as a wall deserves to have that wall become a home. Wade met Martha's eyes. Tell her she and you children already made it a home. I just held it up for a while. Emma climbed into his lap, careful of his bandaged feet. Papa, you were brave. No, little one, we were brave. All of us. That evening, as they ate a meager supper of beans and salt pork, Wade looked at the cracked wall he'd held through the night. Tomorrow he'd need to repair it properly, along with the roof and a dozen other things. They'd need more supplies to replace what the storm had taken, more firewood, more everything. But tonight, they were together, alive. A family forged not by blood but by choice, tested by storm and found strong enough. Martha caught his eye and signed something he'd learned, together. Wade signed back, his fingers still clumsy but sure, always. Outside. The October snow began to melt under an apologetic sun, but winter's warning had been delivered. They had maybe a month to prepare for the real cold. Wade flexed his slowly healing feet and began planning, not planning to leave, as he would have just weeks ago, but planning to stay, planning to build something stormproof, something that could shelter not just bodies but hearts, something worth standing against the wind for, no matter how cold it got, something like family. The rider appeared at dawn 3 days after the storm, moving through morning mist like a ghost from Wade's past. Wade was splitting wood, his body still aching from the blizzard ordeal. When he saw the familiar slouch in the saddle, the way the man held his reins loose and easy, his stomach dropped even before the rider's face became clear. Jake, his younger brother, who he hadn't seen in 7 years. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake said, dismounting with the fluid grace Wade remembered. Wade Drifter, playing house. Wade set down his axe carefully, aware that Martha was watching from the doorway, that Samuel had stopped feeding Biscuit to stare. Jake? His brother looked older, harder, with new lines around his eyes and a scar across his jaw Wade didn't recognize. But the grin was the same, reckless, charming, dangerous. "Took me 3 months to track you down," Jake said, pulling Wade into a rough embrace that smelled of whiskey and road dust. "Heard rumors of a drifter gone domestic. Didn't believe it till I saw it myself." "How did you find me?" "Man at Millfield Ranch. Said you'd been working yourself near to death for supplies. For them." Jake's eyes found Martha in the doorway. "That the widow? Her name is Martha. Can't talk, can't hear, from what I was told." Jake shook his head. "Christ, Wade. You always did like your strays." Wade's fist clenched, but Emma chose that moment to run out, chasing an escaped chicken. She skidded to a stop, staring at Jake with wide eyes. "Who are you?" Jake's grin softened a fraction. "I'm your papa's brother. Your Uncle Jake." Emma looked between them, clearly seeing the resemblance, same dark hair, same lean build, though Jake wore it looser, easier, like trouble looking for a place to happen. "Papa doesn't talk about family." "No, I suppose he wouldn't." Jake ruffled Emma's hair, and she ducked away, running to Wade's side. "Shy one." "Careful one," Wade corrected. "What do you want?" "Jake, can't a man visit his brother? You've never done anything without a reason?" Jake laughed, the sound carrying across the morning air. "Fair enough. Let's walk." Wade looked back at Martha, who signed something he recognized as, "Be careful." He nodded, then followed Jake away from the shelter, toward the creek that ran a quarter-mile distant. "You look like hell," Jake said conversationally. "Living rough doesn't suit you anymore." "I'm not living rough. I'm living with a deaf widow and 2 brats who aren't even yours." Wade stopped walking. "Say whatever you came to say." Jake pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with promise. He opened it, revealing gold nuggets that caught the morning sun like captured fire. "California, brother. The real deal this time. Not rumors or dreams, actual gold. I've got a claim, proved and productive. But I need a partner I can trust." Wade stared at the gold, remembering all the nights he'd dreamed of such a find, such a chance. "You left me in Denver with nothing but bruises and a busted lip. That was 7 years ago. I was young, stupid. You were a thief who used his own brother as a distraction while you robbed the gaming house." Jake had the grace to look ashamed. "I've changed. Have you?" "Look." Jake pulled out a map, professionally drawn. "The claim's real, legal. I've got papers and everything. 6 months of work. We'd both be rich. Real rich. Set for life rich." Wade studied the map, saw the official seals, the surveyor's marks. It looked legitimate. "Why me?" Because every partner I've taken has tried to kill me for my share. You're the only honest man I know." Jake laughed bitterly. "Isn't that something? The brother I betrayed is the only one I trust. I've got responsibilities here." "To them," Jake's voice turned dismissive. "Wade, you're playing nursemaid to another man's family. They're not your blood, not your problem. They're mine now. Are they? Is she warming your bed? Have you married her, or are you just playing pretend, hoping that if you provide enough, she'll eventually let you—" Wade's punch knocked Jake flat, blood spurting from his nose. Don't talk about her like that." Jake sat up slowly, wiping blood with his sleeve. "Christ, you're in love with her. It's not like that." "No." Jake got to his feet, surprisingly unbothered by the punch. "Then what's it like? Tell me, brother. What's the great Wade Drifter doing playing father to another man's children?" Wade thought of Emma calling him Papa, of Samuel standing beside him against the storm, of Martha's hand finding his in the darkness. Building something. Building what? A shack that nearly blew down, a family that's not yours, a life that'll keep you poor until you die. Jake pulled out a second item, a daguerreotype in a silver frame. Wade recognized it immediately, their mother, taken just months before she died. "She kept hoping you'd come back," Jake said quietly. "Even at the end, she'd ask if anyone had seen you, died calling your name." Wade took the photograph with shaking hands. Their mother looked so young, so fragile. He traced her face with one finger, remembering her laugh, her stories, the way she'd held him when nightmares came. "I couldn't watch her die," Wade said roughly. "Couldn't sit there and see her fade away. But you could stand against a blizzard for strangers. They're not strangers. They're—" Wade stopped, unable to explain what they'd become to him. "How did you tell someone that 3 people had given you what gold never could, a reason to stop running? Come with me." Jake pressed. 6 months? You could come back rich. Give them everything. Real house. Good clothes. Proper education for the boy. The girl could have dolls and dresses. The widow Martha, she could have doctors, maybe ones who could help her hear. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. Wade looked at the gold again, imagined returning with enough money to build something solid, something that wouldn't shake in storms. "What about them while I'm gone?" Wade asked. "Leave them money. They survived before you. Barely. And they'll survive after. Unless—" Jake's eyes glinted. "Unless you think she won't wait. Unless you think she'll find another protector while you're gone." Wade thought of Martha's kiss during the storm, fierce and desperate, of her hand saying he deserved a home, of the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, like he was something more than a drifter who'd taken them in. "I need to think about it," Wade said. "Think fast. I leave tomorrow at dawn, with or without you." They walked back in silence. At the shelter, Jake made a show of charm, producing peppermint sticks for the children from his saddlebags, tipping his hat to Martha with exaggerated courtesy. But Wade saw how Martha's eyes tracked Jake's movements, wary as a deer scenting wolf. That evening, after Jake had bedded down in the barn with his expensive bedroll and promises of fortune, Wade sat by the fire, the gold nugget Jake had forgotten heavy in his pocket. Martha and the children were asleep, or pretending to be. He pulled out his mother's photograph, studying it in the firelight. She'd died alone, asking for him. He'd failed her, chosen the coward's path of absence rather than presence. Now he had another choice: gold that could secure everyone's future, or staying with uncertainty and poverty, but together. Samuel stirred, came to sit beside him. "That your ma?" "Yes." "She's pretty." "You look like her around the eyes." Wade showed him the gold nugget. "Jake wants me to go to California. Mine for gold." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "You going?" "I don't know. We did all right before you came." Samuel's voice was carefully neutral. "Ma's strong. We'd survive." "That what you want me to go?" Samuel turned to face him fully, and Wade saw the man the boy would become: steady, thoughtful, protective. I want you to choose us because you want to, not because you feel obligated. Ma taught me that love given from duty ain't really love at all. Your ma's a wise woman. So was yours, I bet. But she's gone, Mr. Wade. We're here. The boy went back to his bedroll, leaving Wade alone with the fire and his thoughts. He held the gold nugget up to the light, watched it gleam with promise, fortune, security, everything he'd dreamed of during 6 years of drifting. Then he looked at the sleeping forms around him. Samuel, curled protectively near his mother, Emma, one small hand stretched toward where Wade usually lay. Martha, her face peaceful in sleep but her body positioned where she could see the door if danger came. They'd survived before him. Yes, they'd survive after him. But would they thrive? Would Samuel learn to read and write properly? Would Emma keep her laughter? Would Martha ever trust another man enough to accept help? More importantly, would Wade thrive without them? He'd been surviving for years, but it wasn't until 3 people arrived at his door that he'd started living. He stood, walked outside where the stars spread across the sky like spilled silver. Jake's horse whickered softly, and Wade could see his brother's form in the barn doorway, watching. Made your choice, Jake called softly. Wade pulled out the gold nugget, felt its weight one last time. Then he walked to the well and dropped it in, hearing the distant splash. I have, he said. Jake stepped out, his face unreadable in the darkness. You're a fool. Maybe, but I'm a fool who knows where he belongs. With them, they're not even yours, Wade. They are now, or I'm theirs. Comes to the same thing. Jake studied him for a long moment. Ma would have liked them, you know, especially the little one. She always wanted a daughter. Don't do that. Don't use her memory to... I'm saying... Jake sighed. I'm saying I understand. Not choosing it myself, but understanding why you are... Jake went to his horse, pulled something from the saddlebags, another pouch, smaller than the first. This isn't charity. It's Ma's jewelry, what I didn't sell for drinking cards. Figured you should have it. Maybe the widow could use a wedding ring that ain't made from a horseshoe nail. Wade took the pouch, felt the weight of their mother's few treasures. Jake. Don't, just be happy, brother. One of us should be. Jake mounted his horse in one fluid motion, touched his hat brim. Tell the children Uncle Jake says goodbye. Tell Martha. He paused. Tell her she's lucky. Not many men would choose poverty with purpose over wealth without. He was gone before Wade could respond, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he'd come. Wade stood holding his mother's jewelry, watching until even the sound of hoofbeats faded. Inside, he found Martha awake, sitting by the dying fire. She looked at him, then signed, Gone. Wade nodded, sat beside her. He pulled out his mother's photograph, showed it to her. Martha studied it carefully, then pointed at Wade, at the photograph, and made the sign for same over her heart. Same heart. Samuel translated sleepily from his bedroll. Ma says you have the same heart as your mother. Wade pulled out the jewelry pouch, set it on the table. Martha opened it carefully, gasping silently at the contents: a thin gold wedding band, a cameo brooch, pearl hair combs that had been his grandmother's. She tried to push them back, but Wade stopped her hands, held them, made sure she was watching his face when he spoke slowly, clearly, so she could read his lips. For you, for our family. Martha's eyes filled with tears. She signed something complex, and Samuel translated, Ma says wealth isn't gold. It's choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Wade thought of Jake riding toward California, chasing gold and dreams. He thought of his mother, dying alone. He thought of himself, 6 years drifting, never stopping long enough to matter. Then he looked at Martha's hands in his. at Samuel watching with hope, at Emma sleeping peacefully. This was his gold. This was his fortune. Not easy, not simple, but real and present, and his. Tomorrow he'd start building that addition, making the shelter into something more permanent. Tomorrow he'd teach Samuel to read from the Bible Martha had saved. Tomorrow Emma would name another chicken and Martha would laugh silently at their antics. Tomorrow he'd be here, not drifting, not running, not chasing, just here, with them. The choice, when made, felt less like sacrifice and more like coming home. The lumber arrived on a crisp November morning, bought with the last of Wade's savings and the silver from his mother's jewelry he'd sold, keeping only the wedding ring and pearl combs for Martha. Tom Millfield had thrown in extra nails and tar paper, saying something about community helping community. But Wade saw his wife's hand in the kindness. Wade stood surveying his supplies, planning the addition that would double their living space. When Martha touched his arm, she'd been different since Jake left 2 weeks ago, quieter, if that was possible for someone who didn't speak, but also more present, more purposeful. She signed something he didn't understand, then took his hand and led him to the cleared patch beside the shelter where she'd scratched something in the dirt with a stick. It was a floor plan, detailed, thoughtful, with rooms marked for different purposes. She'd even drawn where windows should go to catch morning sun. Ma studied architecture books, Samuel explained, appearing beside them. Before she married First Pa, she wanted to design houses. Wade stared at the plans, then at Martha. She signed something rapidly, and Samuel translated. She says she's been planning this house in her head for weeks. Says if we're building, we should build right. Wade knelt, studying her design more carefully. It was brilliant, using the existing shelter as one wall, adding 3 rooms that would wrap around it, creating a protected courtyard in the center. The kitchen would face east for morning light, the bedrooms west for warmth in winter evenings. He picked up the stick, added a detail, a covered porch where they could sit summer evenings. Martha smiled, took the stick back, and added her own touch, a window seat in what would be the main room. They spent the morning like that, planning their home together in dirt and dreams, while Emma played with Biscuit and Samuel practiced his letters on a slate. It felt like something sacred, this imagining of permanence. "We'll need help with the roof," Wade said finally. "Can't do that alone," Martha signed. And Samuel said, "Ma thinks Mr. Millfield would help. Maybe others too, if we asked right." Wade doubted it. The town had made its feelings clear about their unconventional arrangement, but Martha was already moving, gathering items with purpose. She emerged with her good dress, the one she'd been saving, and Wade's cleanest shirt. "What are you doing?" she signed rapidly, and Samuel's eyes widened. "Ma says we're going to town. All of us. Says we're going to church tomorrow. Says it's time people saw us for what we are, not what they assume." "Martha, I don't think—" She cut him off with a gesture, then wrote in the dirt, "Trust me." The next morning, they walked to town as a family, cleaned and pressed as much as their circumstances allowed. Martha had worked miracles with their appearance, Emma's hair braided with ribbons saved from something. Samuel's shirt mended so carefully the patches barely showed. Wade shaved clean for the first time in months. The church was full when they arrived, conversations stopping as they entered. Wade felt every eye tracking them as they found seats in the back row. Emma pressed close to his side while Samuel sat tall, defensive, but Martha sat serene, her hands folded, her face peaceful. Reverend Patterson's sermon was about casting stones in judgment, and Wade wondered if Martha had somehow known, or if God had his own sense of timing. When it came time for community announcements, Martha did something that stunned everyone. She stood up. The church went silent. Martha looked at Samuel, who stood beside her, voice shaking but clear. "My ma wants me to translate for her." Martha's hands began to move, and Samuel's voice grew stronger as he spoke her words. "My name is Martha Collins. I am deaf, but I am not broken. I am a widow, but I am not defeated. My children and I would have died without Wade Drifter's kindness. He shares his last bite of food with us. He stood against a blizzard to keep us safe. He chose us when he could have chosen gold. Jake's visit was already town gossip, apparently. Martha continued signing, and Samuel translated, "I know you think our arrangement is improper. You're right. It is improper for a good man to sacrifice so much without recognition. It is improper for my children to call him father without the blessing of God and community." She paused, her hand still, then began again. "Wade Drifter has asked me to marry him. I have accepted. We would like Reverend Patterson to perform the ceremony. If he's willing. We would like you, our neighbors, to witness it, if you're willing. But willing or not, we will be a family, because family isn't determined by your approval, but by our choice." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Then, from the middle of the church, Tom Millfield stood. "I'll witness it. Man's proved his character, far as I'm concerned." His wife stood beside him. "As will I, and I'll provide the wedding cake." One by one, others stood. Not everyone. Mrs. Henderson remained firmly seated, face pinched with disapproval, but enough. More than enough. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat. "Well then, when would you like the ceremony?" Wade found his voice. "Soon as possible, Reverend. Before winter sets in proper. 2 weeks from today. Then, give folks time to prepare." As they filed out after service, people who'd avoided them for weeks stopped to shake Wade's hand, to touch Martha's arm gently, to pat the children's heads. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, back at the shelter, Wade found Martha sitting by the creek, tears streaming down her face. He sat beside her, uncertain. She pulled out a piece of paper, worn from folding and refolding, and handed it to him. It was a letter from a school for the deaf in Boston, dated 6 months ago, offering her a position as a teacher and housing for her and the children. "Why didn't you go?" Wade asked, knowing she could read his lips. She signed slowly, and he understood some of it. Scared. Children. Change. Then she took the letter back and deliberately tore it into pieces, letting them float away on the creek's current. She wrote in the dirt beside them, "Choosing you, choosing here, choosing us." Wade pulled her close, felt her silent sobs against his chest. Not sadness, he realized, but relief. She'd been carrying that escape route for months, and now she was letting it go. "I need to tell you something," Wade said against her hair. "About Jake's offer. About why I really stayed." She pulled back, watched his face as he spoke slowly, making sure she could read every word. "It wasn't noble. Wasn't about doing right. I stayed because I'm selfish. Because you three gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. Home. Purpose. Love." He stopped. Started again. "I love you, Martha. Not just as someone to protect, but as my heart. You and Samuel and Emma. You're my heart walking around outside my body." Martha's hands moved to his face, tracing the lines there, the weathering of years alone. Then she did something she'd never done before she spoke. Just one word, rough from disuse, but clear: love. Wade kissed her then, properly, not desperately like during the storm, but softly, with promise. When they pulled apart, Samuel and Emma were standing nearby, grinning. "Does this mean the wedding's real?" Emma asked. "Can I wear Ma's pearl combs?" "It's real," Wade confirmed. Real as anything's ever been. That evening, as they ate supper in their patched shelter, Wade pulled out his mother's wedding ring. It was simple, just a plain gold band worn thin by years of work. But Martha's eyes filled when she saw it. "It was my mother's," Wade explained. "Jake saved it. Thought maybe you'd wear it, if you want." Martha held out her hand, and Wade slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her. Samuel raised his cup of water. "To our family, the real one, not the one people think we should be. To our family, Wade agreed. Emma added, "And to Biscuit, she's family too." They laughed, even Martha laughed her silent laugh, and Wade realized this was what Jake couldn't understand, what gold couldn't buy. This moment, these people, this choice to stay and build and trust. That night, as they settled for sleep in their separate corners for the last 2 weeks of propriety, Wade heard Martha signing to her children. Samuel translated softly, "Ma's telling us the story of how a drifter became a father and a shelter became a home. And a silent woman found her voice," Wade added. Martha smiled at him across the dim space and signed what he now knew meant always. 2 weeks. Then they'd stand before God and town and make official what their hearts had already decided. They'd build that addition, create that home she'd drawn in the dirt. They'd weather whatever storms came, literal or figurative. But tonight, with his mother's ring on Martha's finger and their children safe between them, Wade knew they'd already won everything that mattered. The lumber for the addition stood ready outside, waiting for many hands to raise it. The community that had judged them was slowly becoming the community that would help them, and 4 people who'd started as strangers were about to become a family blessed by more than just necessity. Wade closed his eyes and thanked God, his mother, even Jake in his way, for the journey that had led him here. Tomorrow the real work would begin, building not just walls but a life. Tonight, though, was for gratitude, for choosing and being chosen, for love that needed no words, for home. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, frost painting the world silver white like nature's own decoration for the occasion. Wade stood in the shelter that would soon be expanded into a proper home, wearing his one good shirt that Martha had mended with invisible stitches. Samuel stood beside him, practicing his role as translator for the vows, while Emma twirled in her mother's dress that had been shortened and taken in to fit. "You nervous, Mr. Wade?" Samuel asked, though his formal address would change after today. "Terrified," Wade admitted, then smiled. "But the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something important is happening." Tom Millfield appeared in the doorway, dressed in his Sunday best. "Preacher's ready. Most of the town showed up, even some who said they wouldn't." Wade nodded, throat tight. Through the window, he could see the makeshift altar they'd built from sawhorses and lumber, decorated with late autumn wildflowers Emma and the other children had gathered. The congregation sat on borrowed benches and overturned crates, their breath misting in the cold air. Martha emerged from behind the blanket they'd hung for privacy, and Wade's world stopped. She wore her good dress with his mother's pearl combs in her hair, which Martha had taught Emma to arrange just so. The cameo brooch was pinned at her throat, but it was her face that held him radiant with joy and certainty, eyes bright with unshed tears. Emma ran to Wade, clutching a basket of dried flower petals. "I get to throw these, Mrs. Millfield said it's my important job. Most important job of all." Wade agreed, kneeling to straighten her hair ribbon. They walked out together, Wade and Samuel leading, Martha and Emma following. The crowd quieted as they approached the altar where Reverend Patterson waited, Bible in hand. Wade saw Mrs. Henderson in the back row, lips pursed but present. He saw the ranch hands from Millfield's place, the schoolteacher who'd refused to teach Emma until she was older, the blacksmith who'd looked through Wade like he wasn't there just weeks ago. But mostly he saw Martha, moving toward him with Emma's hand in hers. Samuel walking proud beside his mother. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Patterson began, his voice carrying across the cold morning. "We gather today to witness something rare and precious, the formation of a family not from obligation or circumstance, but from choice." Martha signed something, and Samuel translated in his clear young voice, "Ma says choice is the strongest foundation because it must be renewed every day." The Reverend nodded. "Wise words. Wade Drifter, do you take this woman, Martha Collins, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to cherish and protect, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Wade said, then repeated it while facing Martha so she could read his lips. "I do, with all my heart." "Martha Collins," the Reverend continued, then paused. "Samuel, If you would translate. Samuel's voice grew solemn as he signed the Reverend's words. Martha watched her son's hands, then turned to Wade. She signed her response slowly, deliberately, and Samuel translated, I do. I choose you today and every day after. I choose the man who gave when he had nothing, who stood against storms, who chose us over gold. The rings. Wade produced his mother's worn gold band. His hand shook slightly as he slipped it onto Martha's finger. Martha had surprised him by trading her last valuable possession, a silver locket, to the blacksmith for a simple iron band. Hammered smooth and true, she slid it onto his finger now, and it felt heavier and more precious than all of Jake's gold. By the power vested in me by God and the state of Texas, Reverend Patterson declared, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Drifter, you may kiss your bride. Wade cupped Martha's face gently and kissed her as Emma threw her flower petals with enthusiasm that made the crowd laugh. When they parted, Martha was crying and laughing silently at once, and Wade realized he was too. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Wade Drifter and their children. The crowd erupted in applause, and Emma shouted, We're a real family now. Samuel signed to his mother, and she signed back. The boy grinned and announced, Ma says we were always real. Now we're just official. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Tom Millfield had brought his fiddle, and the blacksmith produced a harmonica. Mrs. Millfield's cake was simple but sweet, and others had brought food to share, not abundance, but enough. The children played while adults danced on the frozen ground, and even Mrs. Henderson was seen tapping her foot to the music. As the sun reached its peak, Tom Millfield stood on a crate and called for attention. Now, Wade here needs to expand this shelter before winter sets in proper. What say we have ourselves a raising? Men stepped forward with tools. Women organized food and water. Within an hour, the frame of the addition was taking shape, many hands making the work swift and sure. Wade worked alongside neighbors who'd shunned them, now sawing and hammering as a community. Martha appeared at his elbow with water. She signed something, and Samuel, hovering nearby as always, translated, Ma says this is how families really form, not just through vows, but through neighbors becoming friends. By late afternoon, the addition's frame was complete, walls raised and roof beams set. It would need weeks more work to finish properly, but the bones of their new home stood strong against the sky. As the helpers departed with congratulations and promises to return to help with the finishing work, Wade's new family stood together surveying their expanded home. 4 rooms where there had been 1, windows waiting for glass, a door frame that would hold a proper door. It's beautiful, Emma declared, though it was really just raw lumber and hope. It will be, Wade agreed, lifting her onto his shoulders. Samuel, what's your ma saying? The boy watched his mother's flying hands, then smiled. She says home isn't built from wood and nails. It's built from promises kept and love given freely. She says we're rich as anyone needs to be. That evening, as their first as an official family, they sat around the fire in their original shelter while the addition stood ready for tomorrow's work. Martha had made a special supper with the gifts neighbors had brought: real bread, preserved peaches, even a small ham from the Reverend's wife. Wade pulled out a paper he'd been saving. Samuel, can you read this to your ma? Make sure she understands every word. Samuel took the paper, eyes widening. It's a deed. To this land, 20 acres. Tom Millfield helped me file it proper. The land's been abandoned so long, it reverted to the state. Cost me my last $3 silver to file the claim, but it's ours now, legal and true. Martha's hands flew to her mouth. She signed rapidly, emotionally. Ma says you gave everything, your savings, your mother's jewelry, even your freedom to wander. She asks why. Wade took Martha's hands, stilling them. He spoke slowly so she could read his lips. Because you gave me more. You gave me purpose. Samuel gave me trust. Emma gave me joy. You all gave me home. Martha freed one hand to sign something. Samuel blushed. Ma says, Ma says to tell you about the baby. Wade's world tilted. Baby. Martha placed his hand on her stomach, still flat but carrying promise. She nodded, tears streaming. When? Wade managed. She held up 4 fingers. Then 5. 4 or 5 months. Spring. The baby will come in spring. Wade pulled her close, then reached for Samuel and Emma, drawing them all into his arms. A baby. Their baby. A child who would never know what it meant to be abandoned, to drift, to be alone. We'll need another room, Samuel said practically, though his voice was thick with emotion. We'll build it, Wade promised. We'll build whatever we need. Emma, not fully understanding but caught up in the joy, announced. The baby can share biscuit. She's good at sharing. They laughed, all of them, even Martha in her silent way. Outside, Biscuit bleated in agreement or protest. That night, for the first time, they slept as a true family in the shelter, no more separate corners for propriety's sake. Wade and Martha in one corner with Emma curled between them. Samuel nearby, but independent as befitted a young man of 9 years. The addition loomed through the window. Skeleton of their future, waiting to be filled with life. Wade lay awake, listening to his family breathe. His wife, the word still felt miraculous, had one hand on his chest, the other protectively over the child growing within her. Emma mumbled in her sleep about wedding cake. Samuel's breathing was deep and peaceful. Spring would bring a baby. Winter would bring challenges. The addition needed finishing. Supplies needed gathering. Crops needed planning for next year. They had almost no money and would need to work harder than ever. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Wade Drifter, who'd wandered 6 years without purpose, was exactly where he belonged. Tonight, Martha Collins Drifter, who'd tried to give away her children to save them, carried new life and new hope. Tonight, 2 children who'd lost one father had officially gained another. The wedding certificate, signed by the Reverend and witnessed by half the town, lay on the table. But the real proof of their union wasn't in paper or ceremony. It was in Samuel, signing father when he looked at Wade. It was in Emma, already planning to teach the baby to milk Biscuit. It was in Martha's silent laughter and speaking eyes. It was in Wade's hands, no longer empty but full of purpose and promise. Tomorrow the real work would continue, building walls, gathering winter supplies, proving to any remaining doubters that this family was as real as any other. Tomorrow there would be challenges and setbacks and small victories, but tonight was for celebrating the choice they'd made and witnessed before God and community. 4 broken people had become one whole family. A drifter had found his home. A silent woman had found her voice through love. 2 children had found security in a father who chose them. And in spring, when the wildflowers bloomed and the creek ran full, a baby would be born into a family built not from accident but from intention, not from blood but from choice, not from words but from actions that spoke louder than any vow. Wade closed his eyes, pulled his family closer, and thanked whatever force had blown Martha and her children to his door that October evening. He'd thought he was saving them. He'd never imagined they were saving him. The circle was complete. The wandering was over. The family was whole. And in the spring, new life would make them even more complete. The last thought Wade had before sleep claimed him was simple and profound. He was no longer Wade Drifter. He was Wade Drifter, husband, father, and keeper of the most precious fortune any man could find, a family who chose him as surely as he chose them. Home. Wade Drifter's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in gold or possessions, but in the connections we forge with others. When he had only $3 silver to his name, Wade discovered something worth more than all the riches in California, a family who needed him as much as he needed them. His choice to share his last meal with starving strangers transformed not just their lives, but his own empty existence into one filled with purpose. Martha's courage in seeking help despite her disability, Samuel's fierce loyalty in defending his chosen father, and Emma's innocent trust all teach us that family isn't defined by blood or circumstance, but by the daily choice to show up for one another. Wade could have taken his brother's gold and pursued an easier path, but he understood that some treasures can't be bought, they must be built with patience, sacrifice, and love. The transformation of their community from judgment to acceptance shows how authentic love can break down barriers and challenge assumptions. When neighbors saw Wade standing against a blizzard to protect his family, they recognized that propriety matters less than genuine care. Have you ever watched someone judge a struggling single parent trying to provide for their children, dismissing their efforts as improper or insufficient without understanding their circumstances?